There we go. There we go. Right. Well, thank you, John, for inviting me along. I thought I would title this talk Opportunities for Natural Flood Management in the Esk Catchment because it's quite a topical thing that's being discussed, obviously, with various things that are going on with the catchment. And I thought we could show you some examples of our work elsewhere that can, in essence, be replicated anywhere, really. A quick overview of what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to say a wee bit about the trust and our work.
Oh,
I'm not
fuck's
sure how
sake.
I'm not sure how many people know about the trust, Forth Rivers Trust, and what we get up to. So I thought I'd cover that. I'd then go into sort of the S catchment in numbers as well, just highlighting some of the different things that are going on with the catchment, and then highlight what nature-based solutions are as well, because that plays a big role within natural flood management. And then I've got two case studies on two different projects that we've delivered around the Forth that I'm going to talk about and tell you a wee bit more about, and then a summary of sort of key take homes as well. So an overview of the Forth Rivers Trust. We started in 2009. Originally, there was only about 2 members of staff back then, but now we've grown to about 20. And ultimately, we used to be a fisheries management organisation. So we used to be called the River Forth Fisheries Trust. But a lot of our work, it wasn't really fish focused. Fish obviously benefited from some of our river restoration work and catchment management projects. But ultimately, we kind of felt that we were a rivers trust at our heart. So back in 2018, we rebranded as the Forth Rivers Trust and yeah, continuing our work across the Forth catchment. We cover quite a large area, as you can see from the map. We cover any river that flows into the Firth of Forth. So it's quite a large section of Scotland. It's roughly about 3,800 square kilometres and it covers pretty much most of the central belt. There are 13 main river catchments within the Forth, and obviously the Esk is one of them. And ultimately, they all have different problems, which I'm going to talk about as we go along as well. Now, back in about 2023, myself and my colleague Amelia took over as co-director, and as we took over, we decided to look at what we wanted to see happening over the next sort of decade or two. So we've created a new vision which can be found on our website, and ultimately we want to see healthy rivers for wildlife and communities. So what is the Forth like as sort of a river basin? Well, it's got a lot of pressures. Roughly 25% of Scotland's population actually lives within this boundary. You've got major cities like Edinburgh, Dunfermline, and Stirling as well, along with all the towns and villages that are in amongst all of that. You also have a lot of prime agricultural holdings, like over in East Lothian, Forth Valley as well, and over in Fife, all putting pressures on rivers. You also have strategic economic hubs such as Grangemouth. You've got rail networks, motorways, gas pipelines, electricity pylons, and cabling. So you've got all of this to ultimately provide the services that are needed for the civilization within the Forth Basin. But that can all have a big pressure on our rivers. Now, the map here shows you the SEPA's classification of rivers within the Forth. In their water environment hub, SEPA ultimately classify a lot of the rivers within Scotland with 5 different statuses, bad being the worst. Then it's poor, moderate, good, and high. And as you can see from this picture, our rivers in the Forth aren't that great. The majority of them are poor, sort of in and around the Lothians and out East Lothian way as well. They're all pretty much poor because of a range of different pressures. And then it's actually only really up in the national park where you've got sort of more rugged wild landscape where you start getting sort of good classified rivers. There's only 1 or 2 rivers that are actually classed as high. You've got one over in Dunblane near and another one over at Callander as well. So the majority of our rivers are pretty poor because of all the pressures that they face. So what pressures do they actually face? Well, the first one, which I think is the worst for wildlife such as salmon, trout, eels, and lamprey, is barriers to fish migration. Because the Central Belt was a hub of economic activity back in sort of the 1700s, 1800s, and so on, you had a lot of mills popping up on rivers. And to power the mills back then, they never had sort of diesel generators or power cables. They had to use the river to harness the power for their milling processes. Um, to give you a bit of an example of how impacted the Forth is with barriers, this map shows you all the barriers within the Forth. Now, when I say all the barriers, I don't mean all of them. It's only the recorded barriers. I suspect that there are a lot more barriers to be recorded on some of our rivers. It's just they haven't been found yet, or nobody's added them to the databases. The little red crosses in this map highlight impassable barriers, which there are a lot of. It's hard to tell actually against the colours, but there's also orange crosses, which mean that they're partially passable for fish migration. And then there are green crosses as well, which is hard to see, which means that they've either been dealt with, either they've fallen down over time, or maybe a fish pass has been put on them, or maybe they've been removed as well. The black dots, or the black crosses, are the ones that we haven't visited yet within the database. So these are the ones that have been reported, but we've just not went out and verified them yet and taken a photo. It's kind of a rolling program for us, but you can really start seeing how this could cause sort of fragmented habitat within the catchment. Other problems that the Forth rivers face include water quality. The Esk, as an example, is a prime, candidate for bad water quality. There's a lot of sewage that goes into the Esks. Mine water pollution as well. The mine discharging it from Bilston Glen into the Esks on the South Esk. Sometimes it just turns the river orange for about 2 miles. And all of that can have a pressure on our native wildlife, whether it's the invertebrates, the fish, the eels, the lamprey, knock-on effect with potentially the birds that eat the fish as well, or the invertebrates. So, it can have a major impact on our waterways as well. The next map that I'm showing you is an example across the whole of the Forth of how pollution is actually getting into our rivers. Now, each of these little dots is a combined sewer overflow. So it's basically connected to your homes. It's connected to the sewer network. So if you're flushing your toilet and it's being taken away to the wastewater treatment works, they have these combined sewer overflows that are dotted around the network. And when it's being overwhelmed, whether there's a lot of rain and it's flooding the network, they spill out of these points into our rivers, unchecked, untreated, just raw sewage going into the rivers. So that gives you an example of really, where water pollution could occur as well. And as you can see in the S catchment, there's a lot of combined sewer overflows because they've got major urban populations in around Edinburgh as well. Other problems that the rivers of the Forth face include water quantity. Now, a lot of people think we're in Scotland, it rains all the time. But water quantity is becoming more and more of a problem where, we have prolonged dry spells during summer, maybe it's really hot as well. And abstraction takes place, and you find that rivers do dry up. There's a number of rivers that consistently dry up in the Forth that we're constantly monitoring to understand why they're doing that and how we can potentially protect them and enhance them with better sort of flow management and water quantity ultimately reaching the river. You also have aesthetical pollution, so litter. I think the classic one on the S that I always remember is the Mary Burn. That was ultimately sewage rag, and the community sort of found this river coming in at Lord Ancrum's Wood, and the pollution that was entering it, and started a campaign, to really amplify the voice of the river. And the community was fantastic in that sort of problem that they were facing there. And some of the community groups were brilliant in being vocal and highlighting the problem, to the press and the people that should take responsibility at the end of the day. It's anything from sewage rag, plastic litter, anything that you could see along the riverbank. It happens in these urban environments. Reduced natural riparian habitat as well is a big problem that faces the Forth. It's you want a mixture of habitat along the edges of the river, where you've got maybe dappled shade from riparian trees, especially in our upland areas. You tend to find that actually the riparian woodland is drastically impacted, and there isn't a lot of trees in some places. And that can cause a range of problems, including, causing the rivers to warm up quite a lot as well, especially when we have these prolonged hot and dry spells. We carried out temperature monitoring in one of our catchments over in the Teeth, over in sort of the west in Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park. And some of our temperature loggers were reporting temperatures of 26 degrees in the river. Now, that is very high, and you tend to find that fish start to get stressed if it's over 18. So it's important that we're seeing that as a pressure for the wildlife that live within the rivers. You also have invasive species such as aquatic plants or aquatic animals. Signal crayfish, we have signal crayfish within the Forth. There are a number of sites across the catchment and basin that these animals are present. They've probably been released because of maybe being put into ornamental ponds, or somebody's wanting to potentially fish for them. And the other one is pink salmon as well. Pink salmon are a new invasive species that are coming to our rivers, and they ultimately stem from Russia. So pink salmon, their natural habitat is the west coast of America. But back in sort of the 70s and 80s, Russia had wanted to try and start up a pink salmon fishery, sort of in the Arctic Circle, sort of in the top of the North Sea and the Arctic. And they released, I think it was somewhere in the region of 900 million pink salmon into their rivers to try and kickstart this salmon industry to use it for food source. And we're starting to see some of them come to Scotland. We don't quite know what their impact will be. It's one of those things that's being monitored, and we hope that they won't have too much of an impact. But with any invasive species, you tend to find that there's a competition for resource. You also have invasive non-native plant species as well, such as balsam, giant hogweed, Japanese knotweed. All of these things are present within the Esk catchment and causing a pressure. Altered river channels as well. As we've built up our river catchments and built along them, or put weirs in for factories, we've changed rivers. We've straightened them, we've embanked them, we've basically tried to harness them for our own benefit at the end of the day, and that's impacted on the available habitat within the rivers that wildlife can use. Climate change is a big one as well. Climate change, it's affecting everybody. We're seeing more erratic weather. We're seeing, changes to when we're getting rain or how much rain we get, heavy downpours as well. And that can have a big problem for wildlife, the rivers, but also the communities around them as well. And agriculture is a big pressure in places. There's a lot of need for agriculture. It's really important to stress that. Agriculture ultimately feeds the nation, but there are some bad practices taking place where you might have increased sediment runoff into rivers. And working with landowners is key in anything, and I'll talk about that in a bit as well. So I thought I'd start with sort of the Esk catchment in numbers. So the Esk catchment is roughly 330 square kilometres. So it's a reasonably sized catchment for the Central Belt. And taking some information from the Careen Land Cover data set, it kind of broke down some of the sort of land uses and sort of land cover information down into some really nice figures. And apparently 49% of the Esk catchment is actually deemed agriculture. So, that could be upland sheep farming, it could be arable, it's a mixture of types of farms within the Esk catchment. You then have sort of general shrub or herbaceous vegetation as well. That's 18%. Wetlands, and a wee bit more specific, peat bogs, 13%. Apparently 7% is forests, 5% broadleaf, 1% coniferous, and 2% mixed. And then 7% is urban ultimately. So, urban populations like Pennycook and Dalkeith and all the little villages that are within the catchment. And you've got 1% for industrial, 1% for water bodies like the river and reservoirs, and then 1% for mines, dumps, and construction sites, sort of all lumped into one. So it's quite a diverse catchment within the grand scheme of things. So I suppose zooming in a wee bit on SEPA's sort of condition assessment for rivers around the Forth in Scotland, looking at the Esk, 100% of rivers within the Esk catchment are worse than good. So 14 of the classified rivers are poor, one is bad, and then two are moderate. And it's a mixture of reasons for that. The majority of the reasons for the downgrades is around water quality, morphology, so whether they've been changed, and barriers to fish migration. There are a lot of barriers to fish migration within the Esk catchment, which ultimately downgrade it in SEPA's classification system. There is an ambition from SEPA to have all rivers within Scotland at good by 2027, but that won't happen because of the pressures that our rivers are facing at the end of the day. There's a lot of investment that needs to take place to make our rivers better and healthier for wildlife and communities. And it's going to take a lot longer than 2027 to ultimately get there. So what would a healthy Esk catchment actually look like? Well, ultimately, a healthy river would see cold, clean water. It would have stones and gravels that aren't covered with silt or algae. It would have unrestricted, fast, riffly flows in places as well, some with a mixture of deep pools and good riparian habitat. It also should have native aquatic plants, whether it's in the river or on its riverbanks. It should also have a good mixture of leaf litter and woody debris because that really helps drive morphological changes within rivers, but also helps the wildlife, whether it's the invertebrates that are breaking down the leaf litter that then lead on to the food source for the fish, and then so on for the otter as well. So it helps the wider food chain to have this sort of good leaf littery kind of woody debris within the river. You would hope that natural channels are also there, so unconstrained, able to sort of wiggle about and move within the landscape. Obviously, that's not always possible in urban environments. And sort of nature helping sort of mitigate certain issues as well that communities might face. So using the nature-based solutions ultimately to try and help the communities as well. So I don't know how many people know about nature-based solutions or natural flood management solutions. Ultimately, a natural flood management solution is using a nature-based solution to sort of solve a problem. It's to slow the flow or tackle something else. But nature-based solutions ultimately are deemed as sort of things that are put within the landscape that are using or mimicking nature to alleviate a societal problem. So whether that's sort of flooding or maybe pollution entering our rivers or climate change, all of those different things, trying to use sort of a natural solution to combat them and protect the environment and protect the communities as well. Different types of nature-based solutions include floodplain reconnection. So a lot of our rivers have been embanked, especially back in sort of the 50s and 60s, when there was a big push to improve land for agriculture. A lot of rivers were embanked to, I suppose, protect the land from flooding. and that can strain them and can in some places cause issues downstream for communities with flooding. Wetland creation is another good nature-based solution. So wetlands are fantastic sources for wildlife, but they can also provide a big benefit for society effectively, because wetlands can purify water. Whether it's coming out of a sewage works, or a septic tank, or maybe there's a mine that's polluting an area, you can use wetlands to take out a lot of the toxins that are potentially going into the river and purify the water so that you've got clean and healthy water once it's went through the wetlands. Tree planting as well is another really good one. Trees obviously absorb carbon, they provide a home for nature, and they also protect rivers from sort of climate change and warming up. You want dappled shade along your river to provide that sort of cool sort of pattern within the catchment. Peatland restoration is another really good one. So peatland obviously absorbs carbon over a long period of time, but it can obviously give off carbon as well if they're damaged. So it's important that you have good, healthy peatlands within the catchment. Tree planting and peatlands do actually slow the flow as well. So especially peatlands, they act as giant sponges within the landscape, and they can absorb water and release it more slowly. So restoring peatlands is a really good natural flood management technique, and we've done that in a couple of places, which I'll talk about shortly. And ultimately also in-stream restoration. Where you've got a straight river, a lot of the times it's probably been straight into either accommodate infrastructure around about it, or it's maybe trying to get water away from an area as quickly as possible. And in some places, especially in the rural areas where maybe you don't really need to have the water running away as quickly as possible, you could start remeandering them, and that helps slow the flow again. And it also benefits wildlife like fish, and otters, and the native birds as well that might use our rivers. So what are the benefits of nature-based solutions? Ultimately, you have environmental benefits. So obviously, if you're putting in place a nature-based solution, you're restoring probably a degraded ecosystem. It might be that you're creating a brand new habitat in an area that didn't have a wetland or riparian woodland. It could be creating habitats as well. That ultimately supports wildlife and biodiversity. The native species like salmon or bird species, they rely on healthy environments to survive, and it is ultimately their home as well at the end of the day. And climate change mitigation as well. Tree planting on a large scale, peatland restoration, they will start absorbing carbon from the atmosphere, and that can help climate change. But also, as you have these freak weather events, maybe the heavy downpours, if you do employ nature-based solutions like wetlands or peatland restoration, it helps slow the flow, and I suppose it just absorbs some of the pressure that it might face from these heavy freak storms effectively. Nature-based solutions also has societal benefits. It can improve mental and physical well-being of communities. It's been proven that being out in nature, being out in the environment, it helps your mental health, and it also helps physical well-being. Being stuck inside, especially for example like during lockdown when we were all told to stay inside, going out on a walk, maybe along a river or within your local woodland, it really does help your sort of mental health and also your physical well-being by being up and active. It also can also help the community resilience, so natural flood management, on some of the projects that I'm going to talk about in a wee bit. They ultimately have been driven by communities, and their whole aim is to help biodiversity, but also provide that community resilience as well. And also outdoor recreation. I'm an avid photographer. I love going outside, taking photos, and having healthy environments really makes you drive sort of to get outside and be there, and go for a walk or go for a cycle, or take a photo of a nice habitat or a wildlife that you might spot when you're out and about. So it can help promote outdoor recreation as well. There are economic benefits as well. So it has the potential for reducing cost of grey infrastructure. If you are putting in place wetlands, for example, to purify water from wastewater treatment works, you're then potentially not having to put in place as much grey infrastructure or processes to treat the water. So it can reduce costs ultimately for running that. It also creates green jobs. Ultimately, everything that the trust does, we employ staff to deliver a lot of these projects, and it's creating jobs for local people as well. And it can attract funding from sustainable development initiatives as well. We're really seeing a big drive in biodiversity net gain, which is really interesting because up in Scotland, we don't actually have legislation that makes it mandatory for biodiversity net gain. And that, in essence, is developers and sort of, infrastructure companies offsetting and trying to improve the environment. So if they're delivering something like a new housing scheme, or maybe they're putting in new pylons or anything like that, down in England, there's legislation that states that they have to then put in uh, biodiversity or habitat restoration plus 10% of whatever they've damaged, which is really an interesting concept. We don't have anything like that in Scotland, but we're starting to see a lot of the cross-border organisations take up the biodiversity net gain sort of angle. And they're starting to invest in nature as well up here, which is quite good, because the amount of money that we need to restore river catchments and make them resilient to climate change, whether it's for natural flood management or habitat restoration, it's in the billions. So there's not enough money from public sources to restore Scotland's environment, and it's going to have to come from private sources as well. So starting on some of our case studies, I thought I would jump straight in with our Pool of Muckart Natural Flood Management project, because it's quite sort of apt for some of the things that could happen within the Esk catchment. The project was pretty much natural flood management at its core, but to get the funding to deliver it, it was also, we were keen to push the biodiversity angle. It was funded through the Nature Restoration Fund from Nature Scot, and also from the EU via a project called Merlin, which we're involved with, which is looking at sort of upscaling nature restoration across the Forth. It was a partnership project between the community of Pools of Muckart, or Muckart, the Forth Rivers Trust, and Clackmannanshire Council. And it was a really interesting project because the community really drove this. They approached the council because some of the houses within Muckart were being flooded out. And it was really important to them that they had a solution. The problem with Muckart, though, was that they didn't meet the thresholds for a sort of physical flood scheme, and ultimately they wanted to explore different methods that would still provide potentially protection to their properties, but they were really keen for the natural angle as well. The trust was approached by the community in Clackmannanshire Council because they initially had a consultant come in to design them a scheme, a natural flood management scheme. And the consultant, I think, forgot what natural flood management actually was. They effectively had concrete within a natural flood management scheme, which you can't call it natural flood management, because you're not using nature-based solutions to protect the environment, protect the community. So they had approached the trust because they had seen our project over in the Allan Water, which was using nature-based solutions, and they asked us to basically help them design a scheme. Because of the community enthusiasm, we were keen that they helped with the design as well. We've got a lot of expertise within our organisation that understands how natural flood management can be implemented, and we were keen to sort of part that knowledge on the community and highlight to them what could happen in their local area, and some of the techniques that could take place. We held a community event where I think there was about 25 community members turned up. Now, I should say Muckart is very small. There's probably maybe about 50 houses in total. So I was really surprised at the turnout. It was really nice to see the community so enthusiastic for the project. And ultimately we spent the evening round a table looking at the sort of available land, and came up with a range of solutions. And what you can see on the slide here is the finished design effectively. Now, the the river sort of was straightened at some point in the history. I'm not quite sure when it was straightened, but effectively the river goes straight and then it turns down. And coming in from sort of the right, the project decided to put in what we call a deflector flow. So it's like a couple of boards that sit above the normal flow of the river. And then we created a sort of scrape channel that goes down to a sort of holding pool as well. The holding pool ultimately was aimed at, so when the river does go into flood, once it hits the bottom of the boards, it would spill out down the scrape channel, and then fill up this holding pool. Once the holding pool fills up, it then falls out at the bottom and then spreads out over the land. And the whole point of natural flood management is to slow the flow and trying to utilise the floodplain as best as possible. The water then continued down, and as you can see in these sort of red areas sort of that are hatched, that's the area that ultimately the water spreads out over, and then it gets back into the main channel as well. There were 3 leaky dams that were also put in that upper channel as well, and that's just to again slow the flow, provide more time for communities downstream to sort of react or protect their houses as well. Moving down, we added another deflector flow, just where that red line is, and ultimately, again, it works in exactly the same way as the one at the top. You know, as soon as the river fills up and reaches the bottom, it starts sort of backing up a wee bit and spilling out over another scrape, then channel that flows down towards more holding pools again. Now, we decided to put in these holding pools in this sort of reedy, marshy area here, to act as sort of like another storage area. You know, we're trying to keep the water on the land for as long as possible. So the area here was really important to try and do that. There's only 2 holding pools on this map, but we actually had enough space and time with the digger to add an extra third. So there is 3, which you'll see in a minute in the photos that I've got. But the other thing that we had installed was, you can see just sort of like a line below each of the holding pools. What we've trialed is effectively a leaky dam made out of willow that we've woven across the floodplain. And the idea is that once these holding pools fill up, they will spill out and over onto the floodplain. It'll then get caught behind this sort of leaky dam again, percolate through. You know, it's not completely impermeable, it will get through, go into the next holding pool and again spill out and hit the next leaky dam, and then it'll always eventually get back into the main river and continue its journey. We have also installed a number of willow leaky dams further up the hill. It's quite a steep catchment upstream from this field here. So the leaky dams, you know, they've been put in, but they won't provide as much benefit as the key things that you're seeing on your screen here. There were some challenges, mostly with landowners. So the community were fantastic. They knew who the landowners were. They were ultimately working with us to engage with them, and there were some landowners that just didn't want to be a part of this. But Church of Scotland here, they were fantastic. They helped us get into their field. They were really keen to support the community, and then upstream the Woodland Trust allowed us to put in the leaky dams further up the hillside as well. So delivering Pool of Muckart, it's always a muddy business. You know, delivering any project, especially when you're working in rivers or you're working with soil. As you can see in this top sort of left corner, you've got one of the deflector boards. This was after the digger had been in to create the sort of scraped channel that you can see down below it. And then these are some of the leaky dams as well that we put in. So the one in the middle is downstream of the pools, and we had volunteers from the local community out helping weave the dams. We also had some corporate volunteers out. And then the one on the right is the leaky dams up the hill. And again, we're trialing the willow. It's kind of a new thing for us because the traditional leaky dam is usually using a big giant log or tree trunk to provide that sort of leaky dam sort of effect. Whereas the willow, it's a living structure, and we're keen to see how it actually progresses. We've never used it before, so it'll be an interesting development. Here's some aerial shots as well. So the big one in the middle, you can see the full site. You can just see the sort of little scrape channel, and then the pond or the pool, first pool, and then it sort of spills out if it was in action. And then you can see the three scrapes down the bottom. What was interesting was, this field before the scrapes was just ultimately rush. It was boggy, it was wet, there was no open water habitat. But as soon as we obviously put the scrapes in, it was opening up a new type of habitat within the field, and it was really interesting to see what happened. When we're delivering a project as well, we're keen to use local contractors. It's really important that we use local contractors because then the money that we do bring in is being recycled within the local community rather than using some of these bigger sort of firms that have shareholders offshore. We always try and use local contractors so the money is going local effectively. And if we can get volunteers involved, we would always get volunteers involved. The other nice thing about this was the local school actually approached us, wanting involved. They basically came up to the site, and they helped scatter wildflower seeds across the wetlands that we created. We had a fantastic day out with the whole school. I think it was a whole school of about 30. And they had a great time learning about natural flood management, wildlife, and then obviously scattering the seeds as well. Right, I don't know how well this is going to work, but this is a video and I'm hoping it's going to play and stream to everybody. It does it on Teams, but this is the first time that I've done a Zoom presentation with it. So hopefully when I push the button next, you will see the natural flood management sort of options in action. So hopefully you're seeing this. Effectively, the water is filling up that top pool and then spilling out over the floodplain here. And as you can see, because it's spilling out across the whole of the floodplain, it's slowing the water down, and it's taking longer effectively to get down towards the houses compared to whether it was coming straight down the original channel. Let's see if I can play it again. Hopefully everybody can see that. And it works really nicely. This was the first time it was in use, and the staff rushed straight out because they wanted to get a video and see how it was all sort of settling in. And yeah, it was really nice to see it in action. So biodiversity enhancements, a lot of these things will also have a benefit to the biodiversity. The new open water habitats were absolutely fascinating to see. The digger literally left, and then there was dragonfly and damselfly moving in. We were finding amphibians as well. It was just absolutely fantastic to see. We also try and do before and after monitoring. So we usually do phase 1 habitat surveys and plant ID surveys to create like species lists. And because of obviously the sowing of the wildflower seed, we started seeing a more abundant sort of biodiversity, sort of range of native wildflowers effectively. And it's having a range of multiple benefits to the local landscape. It's helping the biodiversity, it's helping the community. It's a win-win all round. So that was the first case study. Now on to the second case study. The next one that I'm really keen to talk about is the Allan Water Project. This is probably our longest running natural flood management project. It's basically taking a catchment-based approach to nature-positive land management and using nature-based solutions to try and tackle some of the problems within the catchment. We get a small amount of seed funding from Scottish Government, and what that allows us to do is employ a land management advisor, Sandra, who is fantastic, who goes out and has cups of tea and cake with the landowners, chats with them, and tries to understand what they are using their land for. Because, a lot of our landscapes are used by farmers, and they have a livelihood off of the land. And it's important that, nobody's coming in and just telling them what to do. We have to work with farmers to basically try and make sure that they've still got their livelihood, but potentially using nature-based solutions to improve some of the problems they might face, or highlight some of the problems that the river might face as well. Core objective of this project is natural fund management, but it also has some other objectives like restoring the rivers to boost Water Framework Directive objectives. So, that's the getting the rivers from the poor to the good effectively. The aim of the Allen Water project is also to develop sort of sub-projects. So, we've got that seed funding from Scottish Government that allows us to have the staff time within the catchment. It then allows us to look for the opportunities for natural flood management and build on those opportunities and go out and secure funding. I think over the last 7 years or 8 years that we've been running this project, we've probably nearly brought in about £1 million worth of restoration, and it ranges in types of restoration as well. And like I said, working with landowners is key because the trust doesn't own any land. You have to work with the landowners positively to achieve a lot of the things that need to be achieved to make rivers healthy at the end of the day. So how does what does the project actually do? So as I said, natural flood management is right up there. Projects that we've delivered include floodplain enhancement, wetland creation, carbon storage, peatland restoration, river restoration as well, installing large woody debris, trying to allow it to re-meander itself effectively. Tree planting, that's a really important thing within the catchment. As you can see from that image here, there are trees along the river, but they are sparse. They're few and far between. And it's important that integrated land management is taken into consideration because you have to work with the farmers, like I said. But we've delivered everything from erosion control using nature-based solutions like willow weaving as well. We've done riparian tree planting to shade the rivers. And also we worked with a couple of landowners to install native wildflower meadows as well in a couple of the fields through an agri-environment scheme. And that's brilliant for pollinator species because some of the arable farms obviously rely on pollinator species to pollinate their crops and continue them. So it was important for the farmers on that one. It has challenges and opportunities, and I would say any project has challenges and opportunities. The challenges, it could be, potentially landowners not really wanting to engage or having different views. It could be, difficult infrastructure that might be around it. So as an example, within the Allen Water, you can see this map in the middle. You've got the Stirling to Perth railway line that runs all the way up the side of the river. And originally, the river used to be very twisty and turny in this stretch. But back in sort of the 1800s, when they were building the railway, they had the option of installing, I think it was like 36 bridges or straighten the river. And they decided that straightening the river was a far more easier thing than building all the bridges. And when you're working at the catchment scale as well, you have to scale up, and that can be a challenge, but also an opportunity. You can deliver more over a large area than if you had to focus on a smaller area. So when you're working with natural flood management, you have to take into account the whole catchment and the opportunities within it to slow the flow within it. Also, again, I want to stress this, working with the land managers is key as well. Now, the map on the left, there are 10 sort of stars here. These are all the projects that we've delivered so far. These 10 projects are sort of spread out across the catchment, and it just tries to take into account some of the opportunities that we found while speaking to landowners. And again, it's everything from peatland restoration and tree plant. Again, focusing in on land managers, sometimes it's not always easy. There are conflicts, but it's important that, you have open dialogue with them. you have to work with them to co-design the projects. It's really important that you do, highlight, how things could benefit them, but also how they might need to sort of manage their land in certain areas so that you can design the projects in specific ways. Multi-land landowner projects are always more complex than single landowner projects. And we're actually quite lucky within the Allan Water where there is one landowner who has about 10,000 hectares. He owns quite a lot of the catchment. And, there are a lot of opportunities within that area, but we do work with a number of other landowners within the catchment as well. What we also found with this project is actually starting small was the way to go. So before we had taken on this project, it was being run by another organization, and a big study had been carried out to, I suppose, identify the opportunities, but there was no engagement with the land managers. And they published this study, and effectively, the land managers said, hang on, you're wanting to do what to my land? They didn't find it useful that somebody was telling them what they had to do to their land, and it riled quite a lot of people up. So when we initially took the project on, we started out small. We knew some landowners within the catchment that were friendly and wanted to work with us. We started, doing small riparian tree planting, some bank protection, and through word of mouth and sort of neighbours looking over the riverbank or over the fence, people started seeing things happening on the river. And that gave confidence to a lot of people to then start approaching us to ask for help and ask for solutions to some of the things that they have on their land that are a problem to their land management. And again, lots of cake. Any land manager that we go to within the Allan Water catchment, we always take cake, and they usually provide the tea or coffee, and then it's usually a good conversation about how they're managing their land, how they're getting on, and then what could potentially happen to improve the river and the habitats and natural flood management. So some photos now, on some of our projects. So the one on the left is a sort of drain that's within a peatland before it was restored, and then the one in the middle was after restoration. So we've put in a lot of peat dams, whether they were made from the peatland themselves or putting in sort of the more rugged structures that you can see on the right. And that helps slow the flow, helps capture carbon, helps stop carbon being released and other gases like methane and things like that. So it helps the environment overall, and there are multiple benefits, especially for wildlife within these areas as well. In-stream habitat restoration, we've done a fair bit on the Allan Water. So I think it's about 4 or 5 kilometers worth of the river that was initially straightened. The landowner wasn't really wanting to re-meander it because he had these arable fields on either side. But what he did say was, inside the river, it's free game. And we installed these sort of large woody structures to create a diverse flow within the river that was initially a very flat, sort of placid sort of flow. There wasn't many riffles, there wasn't many pools. It was sort of uniform depth as well from when it was straightened and dredged. But adding these structures helped create that diversity that wildlife actually need. It was fascinating to see. So our before monitoring in this project, we carry out a lot of electrofishing. So it's effectively surveys for native fish, and it puts an electrical current through the water, and it sort of attracts them to a net, and we capture them, and then we carry out our survey on them. So we measure their size and their weight, things like that, to understand the health of a river's fish population. And we also try and figure out where they are within a river catchment as well, and a river. And what was interesting at this site was before we put the large woody structures in, they were evenly spread out across the whole of the river channel. When we installed the large woody structures and started creating those riffles, runs, pools, we were actually finding that there was 1,000% increase in the fish congregating around these structures. Now, it's not 1,000% increase in fish, it's just the fact that they were drawn to these structures because it provides them a safe haven effectively, and it provides them the habitat that they require. We've also installed a number of wetlands and reconnected the floodplain. There was a large embankment that went down the River Allen, and what we carried out was we breached the embankment in a certain place, and we created a large wetland scrape behind it as well. And effectively that allowed us to, flood an area that initially wasn't being flooded because of the embankment, and it provided storage on the floodplain as well. Wetlands are fantastic. Wading birds love wetlands. The wetlands that we've put in on the Allen Water catchment, they aren't very deep. You're talking maybe half a metre deep at the most, gradually scraped back to being shallow as well. And you've got a diverse range of plant species, invertebrates, amphibians, and wading birds that are now using these areas that before it might have just been sort of grassland areas. The other thing that we've done in this location as well is broken the field drains. So, back in the 50s and 60s, when the land was being drained for additional food production, there was numerous clay drains put in across the landscape. And we actually went through and identified where they were coming out into the river, worked with the landowners for identifying areas that they didn't mind being extra wet. It might be that they aren't actually using it for anything now. And we dug down, broke the clay drain, and then that backed the water up and effectively created the wetlands in some parts of the catchment. But for natural flood management, these things are really important because it just slows the flow. It keeps the water on the land for longer, protecting communities downstream. Tree planting is another great thing that's taken place within the catchment on that project. The riparian corridors, we've got conifer plantations there that are actually being felled at the moment. And we're working with the landowners to put in native plantations, native broadleaf trees along the rivers to provide that habitat for wildlife. And we're doing it with the support of local volunteers as well. Highland Spring, the water company, abstracts from the Allen water. So if you ever drink a bottle of Highland Spring, effectively it's come from this catchment, and they're working with us to do a lot of the tree planting as well within the catchment and improve the river's health as well. We try and use sort of biodegradable tree guards as well, but it's really difficult to get a hold of them. Everybody's trying to move to the biodegradable tree guards, and there's a bit of a competition on who can get them, I think. So we've trialed a range of different tree guards. You can see the green ones, the little square green ones. These are actually cardboard guards, and if anybody is doing tree planting, please never use cardboard guards because they are useless. The one in the middle with all the volunteers around it, the sort of creamy colored one, that is actually made from, I think it's like sheep's wool as well. And those are biodegradable effectively. We had a student from SRUC as well come to us saying that they had a farm and they had some sheep, and they had heard of effectively creating like a little teepee around trees with sheep's wool. And apparently the tannins within sheep's wool discourage deer browsing. So we've trialed some sort of unique tree protection measures as well in this catchment. So it's got a right mixture, but we're ultimately trying to plant up the riparian corridors, the hillsides, to eventually slow the flow, because a canopy of trees would slow the flow as it's raining, it's hitting all the leaves, it's taking longer to reach the ground and effectively get into the river. So having healthy riparian woodlands ultimately helps the benefits the catchment and communities downstream for natural flood management. And again, another video. So I'm hoping that the videos are working because I really like this one. This is showing a leaky dam in action. So within the catchment, we've also deployed a number of leaky dams. I think we're up to about 30 or 40 in key locations. And within this catchment, because you've got sort of areas that are sort of less steep, we've really played with the landscape features as well. If there's areas that could be flooded with a leaky dam being put in, we've really utilized the landscape here. And at this site, so when I play it, you'll see it. There's actually an embankment that runs down the edge of the river. and we breached the embankment so that the water could effectively go in behind it, and we created a scrape that went down the side towards a wetland down the bottom corner. So I'm going to push play now and let the river do all the talking, but I think my colleague Sandra is also talking, explaining what's happening.
Right, here's Leaky Dam in action, downstream, water's hitting the Leaky Dam, breaking through the embankment, and it's heading away down, away to the burn, heads along the side, and it goes to round the edge of that arable field, and it goes to a wetland, so it's taking the pressure off of this wee burn. So that's working. Wow.
Now, the landowner that owns all of this land, he also owns Highland Spring, which you can see in the far distance in the big warehouses. And you know, Highland Spring actually is at a flood risk, and this is one of the reasons why they're really keen for natural flood management. You know, it protects their infrastructure downstream and their buildings, their supply, their income, but also, you know, it's working with nature. It's not just building walls around their factories. It's utilizing the landscape that they have to capture the water for longer periods and stop it from getting to their factory. I really like this sort of leaky dam section. It's really useful. It's quite a unique little sort of leaky dam, because you can see the water being removed from the river, or excess water, I should say. You know, there's still water going underneath the leaky dam. You know, it's not dry in the channel out downstream, and it's storing it in another location to eventually sort of percolate through the soils and back into the river over a longer period of time. So key take homes, you know, I would say that there are lots of opportunities for the two projects that I've just discussed, and types of things that we've implemented on those projects within the Esk catchment. I think, you know, looking at the headwaters, sort of in around Gorewater and sort of up around the reservoirs as well. You know, there are opportunities out there to implement scrapes and overflow channels and leaky dams, and it'll all have a benefit ultimately for, you know, communities downstream. And I do think that, you know, even if it's a localized benefit for slowing the flow, you know, it might be that there's a community that are affected by flooding. You could potentially implement similar things within these areas to slow the flow and either give them a wee bit longer to react, or potentially solve the problem. The one thing that I would like to stress, though, is that it's really difficult to understand how nature-based solutions are having an impact. You know, there are a lot of studies out there that are being carried out down south, and also the Edelston water. You know, they've been monitoring these natural flood management projects to understand how they might slow the flow, how much impact they're having. And you know, the general consensus is that they do have a benefit, whether it's for biodiversity, natural flood management. But one of the things that the Edelston project had found out was that, you know, as it starts getting into the bigger floods, you know, the massive inundations, you know, the 1 in 200 year floods, you find that the natural flood management techniques do get drowned out. You know, these floods, though, are massive. They're the catastrophic ones. So it's really interesting research, and I would say definitely give the Edelston water a Google to find out more about that project as well, and some of the things that they're finding out. It's really important to collaborate as well, you know, partnerships and scaling up. It's, you know, working with a range of partners, whether that's local authorities, nature agencies, communities, other NGOs. You know, you have to work in partnership to really get the scale that you need to, and especially the landowners. You know, the landowners are key to all of this as well. And you know, lots of problems can be overcome in a partnership. You know, you can work together to either push for a certain thing, whether it's nature-based solutions, or, you know, try and encourage people to change their views as well, by constantly talking about things and highlighting the benefits of some of these sort of solutions for natural flood management. I'm nearly there, nearly over talking. Hopefully, I haven't sent anybody to sleep, but I just thought I'd put some handy links in. If you haven't seen our YouTube channel, I would definitely say give it a wee browse. We've got a couple of videos that we've made. So we've got like a year in the life of video of some of the projects that we've delivered. I think it was back in 2022. The Allen Water Project, if you'd like to learn more about it, we've got a video that's sort of showing you the nature-based solutions for natural flood management up close, with myself and Sandra having a chat about them. We've got a World Rivers Day video and a peatland series video, which is talking with one of the landowners that we worked with, and restoring the peatland and the benefits of restoring the peatland, but also the benefits to local economy, skills, and things like that. And that is me. I suppose now's the time for any questions. John, I don't know if you want to take over, but